Before we begin, imagine a quiet room where nothing dramatic happens. No sudden twists, no shocking revelations, only the slow and steady unfolding of a life examined with a kind of dull, careful patience. Now picture a woman who has stood on stages, spoken on screens, and lived in the center of attention, yet arrives at 70 with a weight that does not shout, but sighs. This is the quiet tragedy of a legendary figure, and though the world rarely sees it, it sits heavily in the corners of her days. The story begins not with a grand moment, but with a soft murmur of routine, a sunrise no different from the hundreds before it. At 70, Whoopi Goldberg, in this fictional narrative, wakes in a room that feels both familiar and strangely distant. Nothing dramatic has occurred to mark the day. No sudden revelation or catastrophe. Instead, the slow erosion of time itself forms the tragedy we speak of, one built not on headlines or sensational events, but on the gentle fading of once vibrant rhythms. In this fictional portrayal, her mornings begin with the same cup of tea, steeped slightly too long, and the same careful shuffle through papers and schedules. There is no urgency anymore, only repetition. The world outside her window moves at a pace that no longer matches her own, and the disconnect creates a subtle ache, one too quiet for most to notice, yet constant enough to feel heavy. She looks around her home, filled with mementos from decades of work, scripts, awards, letters, set photos, but instead of sparking joy, they sit like relics of a museum exhibition. The stillness is both comforting and sorrowful. Her career, vibrant in memory, is distant in present reality. There is a specific kind of loneliness in being admired by millions, yet deeply alone in the quiet spaces of one's life. And in this fictionalized version of events, that is the tragedy. The realization that applause fades and the silence that comes after lasts much longer. As she moves slowly through her morning routine, the weight of years sits with her. Not the weight of regret, though there are always some, but the weight of limitations. Joints stiffen, energy wanes. The spark that once carried her through long days of filming and performing now flickers in smaller ways. It's not extinguished, but diminished. The public sees a figure of confidence, humor, and resilience, but privately, again, in this fictional narrative, there is an emptiness she cannot quite name. A sense that the world around her is moving on, quicker than she can keep up with. The entertainment industry has changed. The audiences have changed. The conversations have changed. And while she has adapted many times before, each cycle has taken its toll. In the slow pacing of her days, she often sits quietly thinking back on the many roles she played, both on and off screen. Not with regret, but with a distant sense of wondering. She wonders how so much time passed without her noticing the years accumulating behind her, like shadows stretching across a floor. The tragedy here isn't a single event. It's the dull ache of transition, of shifting from relevance to reflection, of being spoken about more in past tense than present, of seeing one's own image, younger and brighter, replayed on screens, while the version in the mirror looks back with tired eyes. This fictional Whoopi Goldberg finds herself drifting between memories and reality, unable to fully grasp either. She remembers laughter, big laughter, shared on sets and stages. She recalls the electricity of live audiences. She remembers the thrill of debates, the joy of banter, the comfort of camaraderie. Those moments still exist, but only in her mind now, softened by time like old photographs left too long in the sun. The tragedy is quiet. It arrives not with a dramatic climax, but with the slow realization that life has entered a different chapter, one she never prepared for, a chapter where days feel longer but less full, where conversations feel shorter but heavier, where the mirror reflects not only age, but distance from the world she once navigated so easily. And so, as the day continues, she sits alone, Not dramatically alone, but simply alone in the way many people eventually find themselves. She flips through channels, watching shows she once guest starred on, seeing her younger self laugh with a vitality she now misses. She wonders if that version of her ever imagined this version, sitting quietly on a couch, wrapped in the stillness of a long career winding down. Thus begins the tragedy. Not explosive, not scandalous, not catastrophic. Rather, one built on the slow unraveling of time, the quiet acknowledgement of aging, and the subtle loneliness that grows in the spaces applause used to fill. It is a tragedy shaped by silence, by reflection, and by the weary realization that no matter how brightly one shines, the flame inevitably softens into a glow.
The final part of this fictional narrative begins with a day that looks and feels almost identical to the many that came before it. There is no shift in the weather, no meaningful interruption in her schedule, no sudden inspiration that arrives out of nowhere. It is simply another day, quiet, steady, and wrapped in the kind of stillness that has become the backdrop of her life. She wakes before her alarm once again, though she still sets it every night out of habit. The alarm itself has become a symbol of something she no longer needs, a reminder to get up for commitments that no longer exist. It doesn't ring because she is awake before it has the chance. She turns it off gently, listening as the faint click breaks the silence. Her room feels cool. The early morning air settles softly across her skin. She sits up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. For several minutes, she remains still, staring at the dim outline of the dresser across the room. The shape is familiar, unchanged for years, yet somehow it feels distant, as though she is looking at a memory rather than an object in front of her. She stands slowly, her movements deliberate. The aches in her body remind her of the years she has lived, years filled with constant motion, long hours, demanding schedules, and physical tolls that could not be avoided. Now, in this fictional depiction, those aches appear without cause, without warning, without reason. They simply exist, woven into the fabric of her days. The kitchen is quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She brews tea, as she does every morning. She watches the steam rise from the cup, curling in soft, lazy spirals before fading into the air. She holds the warm mug between her hands, feeling the heat seep into her fingers. There is a subtle heaviness in her thoughts today. Not sadness, not fear, just a weight that sits quietly in the background. She cannot pinpoint its origin. It may come from the monotony of her days, or from the quiet realization that time continues to stretch forward without offering anything new. Or perhaps it comes from the simple truth that she has grown used to silence in a way she never expected. She sits in her usual chair, the one with the cushion that has become thin over the years. She sips her tea slowly, feeling the warmth travel through her chest. She looks around the living room, observing the objects she knows so well. The shelves filled with books she has already read, the framed photos that capture moments long gone, the small table with a lamp that flickers occasionally for reasons she cannot explain. Her eyes rest on a particular photograph, one taken decades ago. She sits in the center, surrounded by castmates, all smiling with a bright, youthful energy. She remembers the day vividly, though it feels like a scene from a different lifetime. She remembers the laughter, the camaraderie, the shared excitement of a project that felt important at the time. Now, the photograph feels like a window to a world she can no longer access. She runs a finger along the edge of the frame, not to dust it, but simply to acknowledge it. A long breath escapes her, soft and unforced. As the morning stretches on, she decides to organize a drawer she hasn't opened in years. The decision is not driven by motivation, but by the simple desire to fill time. She kneels beside the drawer, pulling it open slowly. Inside, she finds miscellaneous items, old notes, receipts, small trinkets from events she barely remembers attending. She sorts through them one by one, not rushing, not searching for anything in particular. She finds a small envelope containing letters written by fans. She reads a few. The words are heartfelt, appreciative, filled with admiration. She smiles faintly, though not out of pride, more out of gentleness. These letters remind her that she touched lives, even if she no longer feels connected to that part of herself.
She places the letters back in the drawer carefully and closes it. The afternoon passes in its usual slow rhythm. She eats a small lunch, something simple, something quiet. She listens to the faint sounds of the world outside. A car door closing, birds settling on nearby branches, a distant conversation she cannot understand. Sometimes she imagines what her life would feel like if it still moved at the pace it once did, fast, unpredictable, full of energy. She wonders whether she would still be exhausted from constant work, or whether she would cherish the movement. She wonders whether she would feel more alive, or simply more overwhelmed. But she does not dwell long on these thoughts. They fade as gently as they arrive. As evening approaches, the house grows dim. She turns on a lamp, its soft yellow glow filling the room with a warmth that feels almost nostalgic. She sits near the window and watches the sky fade into shades of blue and purple. The street lights flicker on, one by one, marking the slow transition from day to night. She reflects on the stories she has lived, fictional or otherwise. Stories of triumph, struggle, joy, and disappointment. Stories that shaped her career and stories that shaped her character. She realizes that despite the quiet tragedy of this fictional stage in her life, she is made of the same resilience that carried her through decades of change. Yet the heaviness persists, not crushing, not overwhelming, just present. A soft reminder that time moves differently now, that life feels quieter, that the noise of the world has grown distant. Night settles in, calm and unremarkable. She prepares for bed with the same routine she has followed for years. She turns off the lights. She straightens the blanket. She sits briefly on the edge of the bed, exhaling slowly. Then she lies down, closing her eyes. There is no dramatic ending, no sudden shift, no revelation. Only the quiet continuation of a life shaped by time, memory, and the slow ache that comes from watching the world change around her. The tragedy in the end is not defined by disaster. It is defined by stillness. It is the tragedy of fading noise, receding energy, and the realization that even those who once stood in the spotlight eventually find themselves in the soft, unassuming glow of quieter days. A tragedy not of loss, but of loneliness. Not of suffering, but of silence. Not of ending, but of drifting. And that is where her story rests. Quiet, slow, and profoundly human.